Okay, thank you. My name is Jennie Sjöholm, and my colleague here, Andrea Luciani, will present actually two case study of mining towns in northernmost Sweden. It's not so much impact of climate change as drastic impacts on the built environments due to urban transformations due to mining that we will be discussing here in our session. So just to introduce the area to you a bit, we're looking at two mining towns in northernmost Sweden, and we find them interesting to discuss also in this climate context because of the huge challenges and dilemmas they are facing due to urban transformations, which are caused by continued large-scale iron ore mining by a state-owned company, LKAB, up in this region. And as I will soon show you, this mining will have a huge effect on the entire towns, and it raises a lot of important questions, basically, and things to take into account when it comes to conservation and management of these historic built environments. Just to give you some idea of the situation, this is an illustration of Kiruna. The picture to the right, you can see that the iron ore body that stretches below in the ground. It's currently they are mining at 1365 meters below ground. And the iron ore body stretches beneath the town, and as mining continues, the mine affects the towns by subsidence and deformations in the ground, etc. So the land will literally crack under your feet eventually. So they need to do some kind of relocation of the town. And the map to the left, you can see that the red line, upper line, it shows an indication of how much of the existing town that will be affected by mining on the current level by the next within the next 10 years or so. And that means that it affects several neighborhoods with residential areas, but also the entire town center. And in Malmberget, there is a similar situation, although it is a bit different. The picture to the right, you can see there's many different iron ore bodies that is beneath the settlement. And as they are being mined, there's also deformation and subsidence in the ground. And actually, which you can see on the map to the left, there has been a huge open pit that started to grow in the 1950s already. So from the 1950s, you have had a huge effect on Malmberget and the built environments. And this open pit actually splitting the town into two parts, the east and the west part of Malmberget. But continued mining will also cause even more effects and subsidence also in Malmberget. And it has been decided that in agreements between the local council and the mining company that over 2/3 of Malmberget will have been disappeared by the beginning of the 2030s. So many buildings will be moved or demolished or lost somehow, just as in Kiruna, where they started the urban transformation in 2004 when they announced that, oh, we will move a town. So there is huge transformations taking place. What's actually meant by moving and transforming the towns, it hasn't exactly been explained, and I think they make it up as they go along in some ways. Some decisions must be made early in the process, and others you can do as the process develops, obviously. But what we especially have looked at now in this paper is who is actually in charge of the decision making in these urban transformation processes that is taking place, and also how it is selected, what is important enough to save, and what can we let go in this process. And as I said, because of the urban transformation, conservation in situ is not an option. the only means of conservation is to actually relocate buildings, which is problematic and could be discussed in itself, what you achieve by doing that. But one major question in this extreme kind of urban development is whether a location can preserve the complexity of an historic urban environment, because we are not talking about just some historic buildings, we are talking about historic urban environments that actually in both towns are designated as historic environments of national interest and are protected as such. And also what we lose and how loss could be managed in these relocation processes. How does that affect the local communities? So this is what we will discuss during the next few slides. First, to give you an insight in the decision-making process and the main actors that are involved in this and are, well, negotiating and competing about what is to be done in this situation. And one main and very strong stakeholder in this is the state-owned mining company LKAB. They own the mines, and that has the effect on the two towns. And according to Swedish legislation, the mine has to compensate for impacts the mining has on the communities. But that compensation is also decided in negotiation between the mining company and various stakeholders. And so far they have to a large extent looked at making economic compensations for functions rather than maybe compensation for historic values that are being lost. The counterparts is to a large degree the two local councils. It's Kiruna, the municipality of Kiruna and the municipality of Gällivare, where these mining towns are located, and has the responsibility to do the urban planning to enable the continued mining. And to some extent, the authority, the county administrative board, is also involved in discussions, and especially maybe in discussions when it comes to the built heritage and decisions about that. On this slide, you see an example from Kiruna that shows a bit of the extent of the problems and the dilemmas caused. The right-hand map shows a conservation plan that was adopted by the council in 1984. You can see several protected areas, specific buildings, and also some green areas that was included in this conservation plan. Whereas during the urban transformation, the local council and the mining company agreed on moving in the first round in 2011 up to, well, about 15 buildings at the very most during the entire urban transformation period. And later they have added about 30 more buildings to that. But what is not moved will be demolished. And it has been arguments between the different stakeholders if this would be a sufficient number of buildings to actually relocate in the process. And in deciding on what to actually conserve and save by relocation, on the one hand, it of course has to do with heritage values and the significance of the various bits and pieces that could be relocated. But there's also a practical side of it. What is technically possible, and is it economically reasonable to do so? And these are some images from houses that has been moved in Malmberget. Not all of them has been moved because they had a declared high historic significance, but it was a mean to relocate a large number of housing in the first phases. The building to the right is the largest single building that has been moved so far in Malmberget in one piece. But it's obvious that smaller buildings and wooden buildings are prioritized because they are obviously more easy technically to manage to relocate. This is some examples of emblematic buildings in Kiruna. The church that, according to current decisions, will be moved, although the technique for doing so hasn't been decided yet. And the town hall, the old town hall, I should say, it is now demolished. There was a big controversy regarding this because it was a listed building, and the county administrative board said that it should be partially dismantled and rebuilt and partially reconstructed at the new site. Was the mining company and the Kiruna council insisted on having it demolished. And in the end, you could argue if it actually became cheaper to do so, because the new town hall on the image to the right became more expensive to build than was anticipated, whereas demolishing the old town hall was more expensive than the calculated cost to actually relocating the building would have been.
Yes, I'm Andrea Luciani, so I will present the next slides till the end of the presentation. So the following question for us is how we can recreate the complexity. So as Jennie has said, we are talking about moving entire piece of towns. So what was the way to recreate the complexity of bounds of social activities of interaction that characterize the heritage value of such environments? You can see in these two pictures, this is the company area of Malmberget, so the buildings that were owned by the mining company. And actually, most of the buildings in Malmberget that were moved were from this area. And you can see on the right the effects of the moving of the building. So you see all these areas that have been cleared from the building, either because they have been moved to a new location, either because they have demolished. And here you can see then what happened in the nearby small town of Koskuskule, which was also an historic mining town, a smaller community, where the buildings have been moved. And in a way, you can see, of course, in a smaller scale, because just 30 buildings were moved, around 30 buildings were moved in this area. You can see that there was an attempt to recreate the morphology of the building, to recreate the relations between the building, the positions, and to move group of buildings together, so to keep the relations, the urban relations between the different buildings and areas of the company area. These are some pictures that shows, for example, on the left, how these buildings that have a different orientation compared to the rest of the town were kept as a group of buildings and were kept in their orientation, which was north-south. Also, you can see in the central pictures, those are buildings from the 50s that were also moved. So the attempt was also to choose buildings from different periods that characterize the different periods of the history of the town, and to have them together in the new location. So again, an attempt to recreate the variation of buildings and the different historical phases. While on the picture on the right, you see some buildings that were for the white collars employees of the mining town, and they were called Långaråden in Swedish. That means the long line. And these buildings, that are 4 buildings, you see just 2 of them, were kept in their alignment. And also the attempt in this case was also to keep the view that you have from the back of the building on the valley and on the mountains surrounding the town. The same was attempted in Kiruna, and here you can see some pictures from the company area of Kiruna. Of course, this selection of buildings is problematic from a heritage perspective, because Of course, selecting buildings means, from a historic environment, means selecting meaning, selecting values, selecting narratives. So, for example, it is kind of interesting to note that mostly at now the buildings from the company areas have been moved and saved, while other parts of the town have not had so many buildings moved and saved. And this, of course, is causing a loss in the significance of the towns and in the discourse and on what these towns will represent. So we'll have the discourse of the mining town and of the influence of the mining company reinforced by this decision, while other narratives will be cancelled and will be lost. But of course, there were policies and plans to mitigate the impacts for the buildings that were lost. Here we are still in Kiruna, and here we are in the neighborhood called ĺslands. That was demolished. It was buildings from the 60s they were the first buildings to be demolished. And you can see different way the loss of these buildings has been mitigated. You can see, first of all, that it was created, one decision that was made was to create this mining park as a buffer zone between the mine and the surviving town. This mining park is supposed to be a transition space from the old previous to the new situation of the towns. And in this park, there was this installation that recreated the footprint of the buildings that have been demolished as a sort of memory of those buildings, of physical memory of those buildings. At the same time, we have an example of the virtual memory of the buildings, because this was an initiative that was performed by the inhabitants. So a bottom-up initiative for remembering the life in this building. So it was created a Facebook page by the people that used to live in these buildings to keep their social relations and their contacts. Of course, an important step is also the documentation of the buildings. The documentation process is also paid by the mining company as a mean to compensate for the impacts. And of course, it works both as a way to support the decision of what is valuable, what is important, what should be kept. And at the same time, it works as a mitigation strategy to preserve, at least as a document, the memory of the buildings that are lost in the process. This is another example of action that was performed in Malmberget, and I think it's very interesting. So it was an initiative from local artists and craftsmen that recreated the whole town of Malmberget in a maquette, in a model. And what was interesting is that they tried also to recreate again the different phases, historical phases of the town. So as you see in the picture in the middle, the buildings are double. They can be put upside down. And on one side, you have how the building and the town appeared in the first phase before the Second World War in the beginning of the 20th century. And in the other side, you will have how the buildings were renovated and changed, and also the town plan was changed in the 60s. Again, already because of the impacts of the mining activities. And we think that this model is a interesting tool, because it's not just a model, but to create it, these two artists collected the experience of the people living in Malmberget. They discussed with them, and the artist was telling us, for example, the discussion to establish the color that a building should have, because of course they were painted many times. So to choose even the color for one phase was a kind of discussion with the locals, with the former inhabitants of the town, and so on. So this model, in a way, is a representation of the memory of the town by his inhabitants. And another initiative that we found interesting was this called Farwell Focus. That means Farwell Focus. Focus was this tower that instead represented the modern phase of Malberget in the 60s. And it was this high-rise tower of apartments. And in these initiatives, the inhabitants of Malberget, the former occupants of the buildings, were invited to to this event, where the apartments in the phase between when they were emptied from all the objects and the interiors, and before the building was demolished. So the last floor of the building was given to different artists to make installations about the memory and the histories of Malberget, and also in the ground floor where the shops used to be, there were installation exhibition by different contemporary artists. And of course, you could see different mixed feelings that tell us about how this huge urban transformation have impacted the community. So we have both anger reactions and more sorrow reaction, but also hope reaction. So the idea of looking at what will happen in the future. And in this artwork that is on the right, they are represented with the black, red, and white color. So in conclusion, we think that we wanted to present these cases in this conference because we thought that there are lessons to learn from this relocation, because it could be something likely to happen in many sites affected by climate change. And what can we learn, and what we can see from these cases is that, of course, this relocation, such huge transformation, imply numerous conflicting social and economic and cultural interests are at stake. And the decision making should be managed in a transparent and inclusive way. So the communities, the local association must be actively involved in the discussion. This is something that not always has happened in these two sites, where the discussion were made by the most powerful actors and seldom really involving the local communities. And then we can note that even when the physicality of the built environment can be relocated, the intangible values of the site are compromised. And then this process of selection of what to move, what to save, risks to simplify the significance of the site and to exclude alternative narratives or meanings. For example, this is in both the towns, there is a huge Sami communities. There are indigenous cultures that are in the town. And finally, of course, we have shown how budget estimation and technical feasibilities are crucial in deciding and giving priority on what to move, and sometimes they are prioritized over the heritage value. So we need to have careful assessments, including qualitative and quantitative methods, as well as openness and flexibility in considering alternative options, because these are vital for preventing unnecessary loss of heritage. What we have seen is also that these assessments are not as objective as we would like to think, and sometimes they fail and are wrong, and then is even more dangerous if they are used as a basis for the decision making. And the final question that we want to conclude with is, of course, whenever we present these cases, is if we really think that what has been done has been enough. And of course, it is questionable, and of course there are a lot of controversies about this decision making. But still, we think we have to consider that in these two cases there has been an impressive effort and a lot of investment of funding to allow this operation that we have presented. So thank you. These are our contacts if you want to contact us with other questions. Moreover, of what we will ask at the end of this session. Thank you.